You know that feeling when someone you love starts slipping away, not in a loud, dramatic way, just quietly, like sand through your fingers. That's what David felt every single day. His daughter Sophie used to tell him everything, late night talks about her dreams, silly jokes only they understood, fears she wouldn't share with anyone else. They were close, really close. But then Sophie moved to Seattle for college. And slowly, things changed. Her calls got shorter. Her messages took longer to come back. Her voice sounded different, more distant somehow. David tried to understand. Kids grow up, right? They find new friends, new responsibilities. New lives. That's normal. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. He'd look at his phone and see her text, "Busy, we'll talk later," and he'd pretend it was fine. But deep down, something was slipping away. It wasn't like they were fighting. There was no big problem between them. It was just silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. The house felt empty now. Everything reminded him of her. A coffee cup she loved using. The sound of the front door she'd slam coming inside. Old photos stuck on the fridge with magnets. He wondered if this was just what distance does to families. It doesn't break relationships all at once. It just makes them thinner, quieter. Until one day you wake up and realize they're barely there. One rainy evening, the city lights were blurry through the mist. The air smelled like wet leaves. David sat by his living room window, drinking lukewarm coffee. Thinking about calling Sophie, but he stopped himself. He didn't want to seem pushy, didn't want to sound needy. He just wanted to hear her voice, know she was okay. Before he could make up his mind, his phone buzzed. He almost dropped his coffee cup. It was Sophie. "Dad, can we talk? I need you." His heart jumped into his throat. Sophie never said things like that. She was always careful with her words. Always measured, especially lately. But this message felt different. Raw, urgent, honest in a way she hadn't been in months. He called her immediately, no hesitation. When she answered, her voice was soft, shaky, like she'd been holding back tears for hours. She tried to speak, but her breath kept catching. David could tell instantly. This wasn't just stress from school. She was really struggling. Every worry he'd been carrying turned into focused concern. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask a million questions. He just said quietly, "I'm here, sweetheart." Because sometimes that's all someone needs to hear. Sophie hesitated. Then she whispered something that broke his heart. "I hope you won't be disappointed in me." That one sentence told him everything. She'd been carrying something alone. Afraid he'd judge her, afraid he'd think less of her. And the fact that she thought he could ever be disappointed in her made him feel protective and sad. At the same time, he wanted to reach across the distance, hold her like when she was little, when she was scared of thunderstorms. But she wasn't a child anymore. She was a young woman trying to handle life on her own. And she'd taken on more than she could carry. His voice stayed calm and steady. "Nothing you say could make me disappointed in you." He meant every word. But Sophie only gave a small, broken reply, "I don't know." That's when he realized how much fear she'd been living with. She didn't explain everything right. Then, she just asked, "Can I come home?" And David didn't hesitate for even 1 second. "Of course, come home. I'll be here." The call ended quickly, but the silence afterward felt different. It wasn't the silence of distance anymore. It was the silence before something changes. David knew this was the start of a conversation they should have had months ago, maybe even longer. But he also knew she was finally trusting him enough to let him see the part of her she'd been hiding. He stood by the window again, watching the rain fall, feeling scared and relieved at the same time. It was strange how one message could shake his whole evening. But it was also comforting somehow. Sophie needed him, not as someone with all the answers, not as a hero, just as her dad, and that alone gave him purpose again. He walked through the quiet house, turning on lights one by one, like he was preparing for her arrival. The room suddenly felt warmer. Like her presence was already coming back. He remembered how she used to walk in, toss her bag on the couch, collapse into a hug without saying anything. Things had changed, but the heart of their bond was still there. It just needed air again. As he prepared for her flight home the next morning, David realized something important. The distance between them hadn't broken anything. It had just made room for deeper honesty. He hoped he was ready for whatever truth she'd bring home with her. Sophie arrived the next afternoon. Walking out of the Boston airport with tired eyes, rushed breath, like she'd been carrying her worries across the whole country. When David spotted her, he didn't see the confident young woman she tried to be. He saw his daughter, the girl who used to fall asleep on his shoulder, the teenager who trusted him with every fear, the young woman who once laughed so easily. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. When she reached him, she didn't say a word. She just walked into his arms and stayed there longer than usual. Like she needed the silence more than any explanation. Their drive home was quiet, but not the uncomfortable kind. Sophie stared out the window, watching the passing trees like she was trying to sort her thoughts. David didn't push her. He knew the truth would come when she felt ready. He'd learned long ago the heart's open slowly, not when someone demands it, but when it feels safe enough to let go. Back at the house, he made hot chocolate. The same way she liked it when she was younger, with a touch of cinnamon and extra marshmallows. She noticed and gave a small smile. The first real one he'd seen in weeks. They sat at the kitchen table, the room quiet except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock outside. The sky had turned pale gray, the kind that makes everything feel calm and still. Finally, Sophie let out a long breath, like she was releasing a weight from her chest. "Dad," she began, her voice unsteady. "I didn't know how to tell you everything. I didn't want to disappoint you." Her hands trembled slightly. She kept her eyes on the hot chocolate. David leaned forward, not to interrupt, but to show her he was listening with his whole heart. Sophie took a shaky breath and started explaining. She told him how since moving to Seattle, she'd pushed herself way too hard. She tried to be perfect at everything. Her studies, her part-time job, her friendships. She wanted to make him proud, wanted to prove she could handle life alone. But instead of feeling strong, she felt crushed. Every day felt heavier. She felt like she was failing at balancing everything, and the fear of disappointing him slowly turned into distance. "I kept thinking you'd be upset if I told you I was struggling," she said quietly. "I didn't want you to think I wasn't capable." Those words hit David harder than he expected. He'd never wanted her to carry that kind of pressure, never expected perfection. He just wanted her to be happy. To be honest. To be herself. ****. Hearing that she'd stayed silent out of fear of his disappointment made his heart ache. "You don't have to be perfect for me," he said softly. "You never did." Sophie finally looked up at him. Her eyes shining with tears. But she wasn't finished. She admitted the loneliness had gotten worse. She was surrounded by people, but felt completely isolated. She didn't know how to talk about it. So she just distracted herself with more responsibilities until she burned out completely. She cried sometimes, not because things were terrible, but because they felt like too much. And she hated herself for not being able to handle everything easily. She swallowed hard. "I felt like I was failing, and I didn't want you to know." David reached out, placed his hand gently over hers. "You're not failing," he said. "You're living, and living isn't always smooth or easy. Struggling doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Those words seemed to soften something inside her. She blinked back tears, tried to hide her trembling lip. He squeezed her hand gently, giving her the reassurance she'd been missing. "I wish I had told you sooner," she whispered. "And I wish I had asked you more," he replied. "But you're here now. That's what matters." For the first time, Sophie let herself cry. Not the silent kind she hid from everyone, but the honest kind she'd held back for months. She cried because she was scared. She cried because she felt guilty. She cried because she finally felt safe enough to show her heart without protecting it. And David didn't move away, didn't say anything to stop her. He just let her release everything she'd been carrying. After a moment, she wiped her face, gave a small, fragile laugh. I didn't think you'd understand, she confessed. But talking to you, it feels like breathing again. David felt warmth spread through him. You don't have to hide anything from me, he told her. Trust isn't something you earn with perfection. It's something you build with honesty. Sophie nodded slowly, finally believing the words she'd needed for so long. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a student trying to succeed, not as a young adult pretending to have it all figured out, but as a daughter who simply needed support. And she realized she'd missed this feeling, this quiet comfort, this safe space, this steady love from the one person who never judged her for being imperfect. As she sat there with her father, hot chocolate growing cold between them, she knew coming home had been the right choice. Everything she'd been afraid to say was finally out in the open, and for the first time in forever, her heart felt lighter. She wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, David decided Sophie needed fresh air more than anything. He suggested they visit the old lighthouse near the coast, a place that had always given them peace. Sophie agreed immediately, almost relieved. She remembered how many important talks they'd had there when she was younger, talks about school, friendships, dreams, fears she hadn't known how to name. It felt right to go back. The sky was clear as they drove, sunlight sliding across the windshield. Sophie looked out at the passing coastline, taking in the wide blue ocean that stretched endlessly. She felt a strange mix of emotions, comfort from being home, sadness from finally admitting how lost she'd been, but also something new growing inside her, a small sense of hope. They parked near the lighthouse. Walked along the rocky path, the sea breeze brushing gently against them. The air smelled of salt and distant waves. Sophie breathed in slowly, feeling the tension in her chest loosen with each step. David stayed beside her, quiet but present, giving her space to speak whenever she felt ready. It didn't take long. Dad, she said, her voice carried lightly by the wind. I thought growing up meant doing everything alone. I thought it was something I had to prove. David glanced at her with a soft smile. Growing up means learning when you need help. It's knowing you don't have to carry everything by yourself. Sophie gave a small laugh, short and tired. Well, I definitely carried too much. They stopped at a bench overlooking the water. The waves crashing softly below them. Sophie sat down, pulling her jacket tighter around her. She looked out over the ocean, like she was searching for the right words. And then, almost all at once, everything she'd been holding inside began to spill out. She talked about her classes, how she pushed herself to keep a perfect GPA, even when she wasn't sleeping well. She talked about her part-time job, which she took because she didn't want to depend on him too much. She talked about trying to fit in with classmates who always seemed confident and perfect. She admitted she felt constantly behind, constantly failing, constantly pretending she was okay. And then she talked about the loneliness. The part that hurt the most. She said she often went through entire days where she didn't speak to anyone in a meaningful way. She tried to hide it by keeping busy, but the emptiness always returned at night. That's when she felt the most overwhelmed. That's when the silence felt the loudest. David listened to every word without interrupting. He didn't rush her, didn't offer quick answers. He simply stayed present, absorbing the pain she'd carried alone. He could see how hard she'd been trying to stay strong. How much she'd feared disappointing him, and how much that fear had shaped her choices. When she finally grew quiet, David spoke gently. Sophie, you don't have to prove anything to me. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be honest with me and with yourself. Sophie blanked, fighting back tears. I didn't know how to ask for help, she whispered. You just did, he said softly. Those words allowed something inside her to finally break open. In the best way. She felt lighter, like she'd been carrying a backpack full of invisible stones, without realizing it. For the first time in months, she could breathe without forcing herself to. She turned toward him, eyes bright with relief. Talking to you, it feels different, It feels like I can finally stop pretending. David nodded. Because you're not alone anymore. Sophie looked back at the ocean. The sunlight shimmering over the waves. I like being honest, she admitted, almost surprised at herself. It felt good. I didn't expect that. David smiled, touched by her sincerity. Honesty always feels good once you stop being afraid of it. For a long moment, they just sat quietly, letting the calm sea carry away the heaviness of the past months. The lighthouse stood tall behind them, a silent reminder of guidance and direction. Something Sophie realized she'd been missing. She didn't need someone to solve everything. She just needed someone who understood her heart. Someone who didn't judge her for struggling. And that someone had always been her father. As they headed back along the rocky path, Sophie felt something shift inside her. The fear that had controlled her steps was fading. In its place grew a gentle strength. A sense that she could face her challenges again. Not with loneliness, but with support she'd forgotten she had. David noticed the change. The way her shoulders no longer drooped. The way her eyes seemed clearer. She wasn't fixed, and she wasn't suddenly free of all her worries. But she was no longer drowning in them. She'd shared them. She'd let someone in. And trust, real trust, was beginning to rebuild itself between them. As they reached the car, Sophie looked at him with a soft, grateful expression. Thanks for listening, she said. I didn't realize how much I needed this. David placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Whenever you need me, I'm here. Always. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie believed it. After their visit to the lighthouse, David and Sophie returned home with quiet peace. The weight of unspoken worries had lifted slightly, leaving room for connection and understanding. The next few days were filled with small, meaningful moments that slowly rebuilt the bond they both had missed. They cooked together in the kitchen, laughter spilling over as they tried new recipes, recalled old family traditions, the sound of pans clattering, the smell of fresh bread. It reminded Sophie of childhood weekends, of simpler times, and she realized how much she'd missed these small comforts. David felt it too, a warmth he hadn't experienced in months, a reminder that their connection had never truly broken. It had only been covered by distance and unspoken fears. Evenings were spent walking through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. The crisp air and dimmed street lights created an intimate, calming atmosphere. Sophie felt free to talk about everything she'd been hiding, her fears, her doubts, even the little moments of joy she hadn't shared with anyone. David listened without judgment, giving advice only when she asked, allowing her to feel seen and supported. She laughed more easily. The sound light and real, and David found himself smiling often, marveling at how strong and honest his daughter could be when she allowed herself to open up. The bond they shared began to feel effortless again, like the spaces between them had never existed. One night, after a long walk, they settled on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the cool breeze drifted through. Sophie leaned back against the railing. Looking out at the quiet neighborhood. David sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke, letting the silence feel natural. Then Sophie broke it, her voice soft but certain. Dad, I used to think I had to do everything perfectly to make you proud. I thought I had to hide my struggles to seem strong. She paused, letting the words sink in. But now I realize you never needed me to be perfect. You just wanted me to be myself. David smiled gently. I've always been proud of you, Sophie. Not for your grades, not for your achievements, but for who you are, the honesty, the effort, the courage to face life. Even when it's hard, that's what matters. Her eyes glistened with emotion. She felt relief she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe something important, that mistakes, fears, and struggles weren't weaknesses. They were just part of being human. David reached over, gently squeezed her hand, a gesture full of warmth and reassurance. She leaned closer, feeling the security of his presence, the kind that doesn't judge, doesn't rush, doesn't demand. It was a quiet promise that no matter what happened, she had someone to lean on. Over the next day, Sophie shared more of her plans for the future, expressing both excitement and uncertainty. She spoke about school, potential career choices, the personal growth she wanted to pursue. David listened carefully, offering guidance without pressure, gently reminding her that making mistakes and learning along the way were part of life. Sophie felt the freedom to dream again. To acknowledge her fears without letting them control her. She realized that sharing her thoughts didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. Because she wasn't alone. That evening, they went through old photo albums, laughing and remembering shared memories. The stories behind the photographs, the jokes. The quiet moments of connection. It reminded Sophie of the depth of their relationship. She saw herself as part of a story larger than her struggles, one filled with love, understanding, and patience. David noticed how much more relaxed and open she'd become, and he felt grateful she'd trusted him enough to return and speak her heart. As Sophie's visit drew to a close, the atmosphere was bittersweet. She had to return to Seattle, but the bond they'd strengthened remained unshakable. At the airport, she hugged him tightly, feeling both the sadness of leaving and the comfort of renewed trust. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice catching slightly, "for listening, for understanding, for giving me a safe place. I needed that more than I realized." David held her for a moment longer, letting the embrace speak what words couldn't. "You'll always have this place, Sophie, always. No matter where life takes you, this bond will stay with you." As she walked toward her gate, Sophie felt deep reassurance. The fear and loneliness she'd carried for so long had been replaced with understanding and support. She realized the most important lesson she'd learned wasn't about independence or success. It was about trust. Trust that she could share her struggles without judgment. Trust that she could rely on those who loved her, and trust that honesty was always stronger than silence. David watched her disappear down the terminal, a mixture of pride and hope filling his heart.